You will become his wife today, Patricia, or I swear I will sell your mother's estate to the developers tomorrow morning. You marry the mechanic, his debt is wiped, and my company survives the quarter." Olin Fletcher's voice was devoid of paternal warmth, echoing in the cold expanse of his mahogany-lined office. Patricia Dunn stared at the marriage certificate, the black ink blurring through her hot tears. She was being traded, bartered to a grease-stained, impoverished single father she had never met, all to settle a shadow debt. She picked up the pen, her soul turning to ash. The ink on the marriage license felt less like a binding legal contract and more like a death sentence. Patricia Dunn, heiress to the crumbling Fletcher Dunn shipping empire, stood in the sterile, fluorescent-lit hallway of the city registry office. She wore a simple, unadorned white dress, a cruel mockery of a bridal gown. Her fingers trembled as she held the cheap bouquet of bodega carnations her father's assistant had shoved into her hands 20 minutes prior. Beside her stood Reed Norris. He wasn't her groom, he was her ex-fiancé, now acting as her father's lead legal counsel. Reed adjusted his silk tie, a smug, pitying smile playing on his lips. "It's for the best, Patty," Reed murmured, his voice slick with false sympathy. "Your father's back is against the wall. This Benson guy owns the parcel of land the Newport needs. He wouldn't sell, but he had a mountain of gambling debts and a kid to feed. Olin bought the debt. The marriage secures the land transfer legally without triggering a tax audit. In a year, you divorce him quietly. It's just business." "You broke our engagement 3 weeks ago, Reed," Patricia said, her voice a hollow, raspy whisper. She didn't look at him. She couldn't stomach the sight of his perfectly styled hair and expensive cologne. "You broke it so you could sleep with my stepmother's sister and secure a partnership at the firm. Don't patronize me with explanations of business." Before Reed could formulate a venomous reply, the heavy wooden doors of the registrar's office swung open. Mac Benson stepped out. Patricia's breath hitched in her throat, not from awe, but from a jarring wave of apprehension. The man her father had bought for her was a towering figure, broad-shouldered and imposing. He wore a faded flannel shirt tucked into oil-stained denim jeans and scuffed steel-toe work boots that left faint tracks of dust on the linoleum floor. His hands were large, scarred, and permanently shadowed with axle grease around the cuticles. But it was his face that struck her. He wasn't the broken, desperate degenerate Olin had described. His jaw was lined with dark stubble, his features sharp and uncompromising. His eyes a startling, piercing shade of steel gray locked onto hers. There was no submission in his gaze. There was only a quiet, turbulent storm. Beside his massive frame stood a small boy, no older than 6, clutching Mac's pant leg. The boy had the same dark hair, though his eyes were wide, doe-like, and terrified of the sterile environment. He wore a faded superhero t-shirt and shoes that were clearly a size too small. "You're late," Reed snapped, stepping forward with an air of unearned authority. "Sign here, Benson, and let's get this farce over with." Mac didn't look at Reed. He didn't even acknowledge the lawyer's presence. His heavy, gray gaze remained entirely fixed on Patricia. He stepped forward, his boots thudding against the floor, closing the distance between them. The scent of motor oil, rain, and cheap pine soap washed over her. "I'm Mac," he said. His voice was a low rumble, a deep baritone that seemed to vibrate in Patricia's chest. "This is Nate." Patricia swallowed hard, forcing herself to look at the child. Nate offered a shy, missing tooth smile. Despite the absolute despair clawing at her throat, Patricia felt a flicker of maternal instinct. She managed a small, fragile nod. "Patricia, let's get on with it," Olin Fletcher barked, emerging from the registrar's inner sanctum. Her father, a man who measured human worth strictly in commas and zeros, looked at Mac with undisguised revulsion. "The judge is waiting. Sign the documents, say the words, and get out of my sight." The ceremony lasted less than 4 minutes. There was no music. There was no kiss. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Mac simply nodded, took the folded piece of paper, and shoved it into his flannel pocket. He reached down, hoisting Nate effortlessly onto his broad shoulders. "My truck is out back," Mac said to Patricia, his tone neutral, giving absolutely nothing away. "Grab your bag." "She doesn't have a bag," Olin sneered, checking his Rolex. "She forfeited her belongings when she decided to be difficult about this arrangement. She leaves with what's on her back. A harsh lesson in economics, my dear. You want to eat? Your new husband can provide. Patricia felt the blood drain from her face. Her father was stripping her of everything, her clothes, her jewelry, her dignity. She looked at Reed, hoping for a sliver of the man she had loved, but Reed just smirked and turned away. Mac stopped in his tracks. Slowly, he turned back to Olin. The temperature in the hallway seemed to drop by 10 degrees. Mac didn't raise his voice, but the sheer, suffocating gravity of his presence made Reed take a physical step backward. "She is my wife now, Fletcher," Mac said, the words slicing through the air like a serrated blade, "which means she is no longer your property to punish. Keep her bags. We don't need your trash." Without another word, Mac turned on his heel. "Come on, Patricia," he said softly. Trembling, stripped of her past and terrified of her future, Patricia followed the towering, grease-stained mechanic out into the pouring rain, leaving her old life behind to die in the sterile halls of the registry. The drive to Mac's home was suffocatingly silent. The rain lashed against the windshield of his beat-up 1998 Ford pickup. The heater barely worked, blowing lukewarm, dusty air into the cab. Patricia sat pressed against the passenger door, her arms wrapped around herself, shivering in her thin white dress. Nate had fallen asleep in the small extended cab behind them. His soft snores, the only sound besides the rhythmic squeak of the failing windshield wiper. Patricia stared out the window as the opulent high-rises of the city center faded into the grim, industrial decay of the Lower East Side. Abandoned factories loomed like skeletal giants against the gray sky. They pulled into a gravel lot, enclosed by a chain-link fence. The sign above the corrugated metal garage read, "Benson's Auto and Repair." "We live upstairs," Mac said, finally breaking the hour-long silence. He killed the engine, which sputtered and coughed before dying. He didn't wait for her to open her door. He climbed out, effortlessly scooped the sleeping Nate from the back, and walked toward a rusted metal staircase attached to the side of the brick building. Patricia followed, her heels sinking into the mud. She kicked them off, carrying them in her hands as she ascended the freezing metal stairs in her bare feet. The apartment above the garage was exactly what she had feared. It was small, cramped, and smelled faintly of exhaust and stale coffee. The wallpaper was peeling in the corners. The furniture consisted of a sagging, plaid sofa, a small tube television, and a scratched laminate dining table with mismatched chairs. A tiny kitchenette sat against one wall, featuring a refrigerator that hummed menacingly. Mac carried Nate into one of the two small bedrooms, quietly shutting the door. When he emerged, he found Patricia standing frozen in the center of the living room, water dripping from her hair onto the scuffed linoleum floor. He walked over to a small closet, pulled out an oversized, faded gray hoodie and a pair of clean sweatpants, and tossed them to her. "Bathrooms down the hall to the left. The water takes a minute to get hot. Change before you catch pneumonia." Patricia clutched the clothes to her chest. "Where am I supposed to sleep?" she asked, her voice cracking. "The other bedroom is yours," Mac said, walking into the kitchenette and turning on the faucet. He began washing the grease from his hands with gritty orange soap. "And you?" "The couch," he replied without looking back. "I won't sleep with you," Patricia blurted out, a defensive panic rising in her chest. "My father may have sold me to you, but I am not." Mac turned off the water. The silence in the room was sudden and absolute. He grabbed a rag, slowly drying his massive hands as he turned to face her. His steel gray eyes pinned her in place. He wasn't angry, which somehow made him more intimidating. He looked at her with a profound, unreadable calm. "Let's get one thing straight, Princess," Mac said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "I didn't ask for you. Olin Fletcher backed me into a corner. I have a son to protect, and signing that paper was the only way to keep a roof over his head. You are here because of a piece of paper. I don't want your body, I don't want your money, and I don't want your attitude. You keep to yourself, you don't break Nate's heart, and we'll survive this year. Then you can go back to your country clubs. Are we clear?" The sheer bluntness of his words slapped her harder than a physical blow. Patricia's jaw tightened. She was a Fletcher, or at least, she used to be. She was educated, refined, and deeply wounded. She raised her chin, refusing to let him see the tears threatening to spill. "Crystal clear, Mr. Benson." She marched into the bathroom and locked the door. The moment the lock clicked, her fragile composure shattered. She slid down the peeling wooden door, pulling her knees to her chest, and wept. She wept for her stolen inheritance, for the mother she had lost, for the fiancé who had betrayed her, and for the grim, squalid prison she had just been condemned to. When she finally emerged an hour later, dressed in his oversized clothes, the apartment was dark. A single lamp illuminated the living room. Mac was asleep on the sagging couch, his long legs hanging over the armrest. He looked exhausted. Patricia crept into the spare bedroom. It was sparse, just a mattress on a metal frame, a single thin blanket, and a small dresser. But it was clean. Surprisingly clean. She lay down on the mattress, staring at the water stains on the ceiling. As the days bled into weeks, the resentment in Patricia's heart began to morph into a confusing, uncomfortable reality. The power dynamic she had expected simply didn't exist. Mac wasn't a tyrant. He was a ghost. He woke up at 4 a.m. every day, worked in the garage below until his knuckles bled, came upstairs to make Nate dinner, and fell asleep on the couch. Patricia, stripped of her wealth and blacklisted by her father from getting any white-collar job in the city, found herself trapped in the apartment. At first, she refused to help. She sat on the couch, staring blankly at the television. But Nate changed things. The boy was relentlessly kind. He would sit beside her, offering her half of his peanut butter sandwich, or asking her to read him his battered comic books. Despite her immense bitterness, Patricia couldn't punish the child for the sins of the fathers. She started making dinner. She started sweeping the floors. She found an old sewing kit and mended the holes in Nate's favorite shirt. One evening, Mac came upstairs from the garage, wiping his face with a greasy towel. He stopped in the doorway of the kitchen. Patricia was at the stove, humming softly as she stirred a pot of cheap spaghetti, while Nate sat at the table, eagerly telling her about a stray cat he saw. Mac stood there for a long time, watching them. Patricia caught his eye. For a fraction of a second, the cold, stoic mask on his face slipped. Beneath the exhaustion and the grime, she saw a flash of something profound, a deep, aching loneliness that mirrored her own. He quickly averted his gaze, muttered a rough thank you for the food, and retreated to the couch. Patricia realized then that her poor, degenerate husband wasn't a monster. He was a man holding the weight of the world on his shoulders, entirely alone. And slowly, imperceptibly, the ice around her heart began to thaw. 2 months into the marriage, the stark reality of poverty had set deep into Patricia's bones. The soft hands that had once held crystal champagne flutes were now calloused from scrubbing rusted pans and wringing out mop heads. Yet, strangely, the crushing anxiety that had defined her life under Olin Fletcher's roof was gone. In its place was a quiet, grinding routine. She had taken a part-time job waitressing at a dingy diner 3 blocks from the auto shop. It paid minimum wage, but the tips helped buy fresh fruit for Nate and, occasionally, a decent cut of meat for Mac, who was working himself to the bone. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The bell above the diner door jingled. Patricia, balancing a tray of dirty coffee mugs, didn't look up until she heard the voice. Well, well, how the mighty have fallen. Patricia froze. Standing near the booth was Cynthia Pope, her father's impossibly young, surgically enhanced wife. Cynthia was draped in a cashmere coat that cost more than the diner's annual revenue. Next to her, looking uncomfortable but inherently smug, was Reed Norris. Cynthia, Patricia said, her voice tight. She lowered the tray. Reed, what are you doing in this part of town? Olin is buying out the manufacturing plant down the street, Reed said, adjusting his custom lapels. He looked Patricia up and down, taking in her stained pink uniform, her hair tied back in a messy bun, the utter lack of makeup. A cruel mix of pity and triumph crossed his face. You look tired, Patty. The grease monkey isn't keeping you in the style you're accustomed to? Leave me alone, Patricia said, turning to walk back to the kitchen. Cynthia stepped in her path, a sickly sweet smile on her glossy lips. Oh, don't be like that, darling. Your father sent us. He wanted to make sure you were surviving. He said if you're ready to apologize, drop the mechanic and sign over your mother's trust fund completely. He might let you work in the mailroom at corporate. My mother's trust belongs to me, Patricia hissed, her blood boiling. It unlocks when I turn 30. He can't touch it. He can if you're declared financially incompetent, which, given your current living situation, Reed smirked, gesturing to the grimy diner. I'm building a very strong case for it. Patricia felt a hot tear of humiliation slide down her cheek. They had taken everything from her, and they were still coming back to salt the earth. She raised her hand, entirely prepared to slap the smirk off Reed's face, when the diner door opened with a violent crash. The heavy glass door banged against the wall. The ambient chatter in the diner died instantly. Mac Benson stood in the doorway. He was in his work clothes, wiping oil from a massive wrench with a dirty rag. He looked massive, dark, and utterly lethal. His gray eyes scanned the room, instantly locking onto Patricia, then shifting to Reed and Cynthia. He didn't rush over. He didn't yell. He simply walked toward them with a slow, predatory grace that made the hair on the back of Patricia's neck stand up. He stopped inches from Reed. Reed, who was 6 feet tall himself, suddenly looked like a frightened child. "Benson," Reed stammered, trying to puff out his chest. "We were just having a family conversation." Mac looked at Reed. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Mac didn't look at the lawyer with anger. He looked at him the way a man looks at a cockroach before stepping on it. "You're in my neighborhood, Norris," Mac said, his voice barely above a whisper, yet it carried across the dead silent diner. "And you're speaking to my wife. I was just—" Mac casually tapped the heavy steel wrench against the palm of his hand. Thwack. Reed swallowed hard, the color draining from his face. Cynthia took a hurried step back, her cashmere coat brushing against a dirty table. "If I ever see either of you within 5 miles of her again," Mac said, his tone chillingly calm, "I won't use the wrench on the cars. Get out." Reed didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed Cynthia's arm, and the two of them scurried out of the diner like rats fleeing a flooding ship. Patricia stood trembling, dropping her gaze to the floor. She expected Mac to be furious with her for causing a scene. Instead, she felt a large, warm, calloused hand gently wrap around her wrist. "Your shift is over," Mac said softly. "Let's go home. Nate helped me make dinner. It's terrible, but he's proud of it." Patricia looked up into his gray eyes. For the first time in her life, she felt entirely, undeniably safe. She nodded, untying her apron. As they walked back to the shop in the fading evening light, Mac didn't let go of her hand. Later that night, Patricia couldn't sleep. She walked out to the living room to get a glass of water. Mac was asleep on the couch, the blanket kicked off his legs. As she leaned over to pull the blanket up, she noticed his phone resting on the coffee table. The screen lit up with a text message. Patricia didn't mean to pry, but the name on the screen caught her eye. Alexander Vance, Chief Financial Officer. The message read, "Sir, the acquisition of Fletcher. Dunn is ready. Awaiting your final signature to initiate the hostile takeover. The board has no idea." Patricia froze, the glass of water slipping from her hand and shattering on the linoleum floor. The next week was a psychological torture chamber. Looking through a new lens, Patricia saw the cracks in Mac's facade, the immaculate fingernails under the grease, the suspiciously expensive imported coffee, the lack of utility bills. The dam finally broke on a Thursday when Nate suffered a severe asthma attack. Panicked, Patricia flagged a taxi and rushed the gasping boy to St. Jude's private hospital. "We need a $10,000 deposit, or we transfer him to the county hospital," the stern administrator informed her in the ER. "He can't breathe!" Patricia screamed, terrified. "Do not touch my son." The voice boomed through the emergency room. Mac strode through the sliding glass doors wearing a dark, impeccably tailored trench coat over a black turtleneck. He didn't look like a mechanic. He looked like a king arriving for war. Mac reached into his pocket and tossed a sleek, solid black card with a gold crest onto the administrator's clipboard. The man went bone white. "Mr. Benson." "Right away, sir." Within 60 seconds, a team of senior doctors stabilized Nate in a luxury VIP suite. Patricia cornered Mac by the window, her eyes blazing. "Mechanics don't have black cards that make directors bow," she yelled. "Who are you?" Mac closed his eyes, the stoic mask finally crumbling. "My name is Macklin Vanguard Benson. I am the CEO of Vanguard Holdings." Patricia stumbled backward. Vanguard Holdings, the ruthless multi-billion-dollar entity that had been buying her father's debt. "You're the richest man alive. And you let me scrub floors. You let my father sell me to you?" "It wasn't a game, Patricia," Mac pleaded. "It was a test, and it was the only way to know the truth." A test? Patricia spat, heartbroken. When my father sold me, you saw a chance to treat me like a rat in a maze? When Nate's mother found out my net worth, she tried to ransom him for $100 million, Mac said, his voice raw. I swore no woman would come near my son unless I knew she loved us in the dirt. I took your father's deal to protect you from whoever else he might sell you to. And I saw my wife. You saw a pawn, she corrected coldly. She looked at sleeping Nate, her heart breaking in two, then walked to the door. I'm done. Tomorrow is the Vanguard Acquisition Gala, Mac called after her. Come with me. Let me destroy your father for what he did to you. Patricia didn't look back. Do what you want with him. The next evening, the Waldorf Astoria ballroom was drowned in champagne and deceit. Olin Fletcher stood at the podium to finalize his salvation, the merger with Vanguard Holdings. The heavy doors swung open. Mac Benson entered in a bespoke midnight blue tuxedo, flanked by security. Olin's smile died. Reed gasped in horror. Mac ignored the pen Olin offered. He took the microphone. Olin Fletcher, you sold your daughter to clear a debt. The ballroom gasped. I am Macklin Vanguard Benson, and I am declining the merger. Olin's knees buckled. I signed an acquisition of debt, Mac declared mercilessly. Vanguard now owns your creditors. Fletcher Dunn is dissolved. Your assets are seized. You have nothing. He glared at Reed. And you are disbarred. The ethics committee has your files. Olin fell to his knees, begging. Mac looked down in disgust. You treated your daughter like garbage. Now, you will learn what it feels like to be a beggar. Mac walked off the stage. He had crushed his enemies and secured his empire. But as he stepped into the night, he felt only a crushing emptiness. He had all the money in the world, but he had lost his wife. For 3 weeks, Patricia Dunn disappeared. She didn't return to the high society circles, and she didn't go back to the auto shop. With the last few dollars from her diner tips, she rented a tiny, sunlit room in a boarding house on the outskirts of the city. She found a job at a local greenhouse, spending her days with her hands in the soil, repotting ferns and orchids. It was quiet. It was honest. She read about the spectacular fall of Olin Fletcher in the newspapers. He had declared bankruptcy and faced federal charges for fraud. Reed Norris was facing jail time. Cynthia had filed for divorce immediately. Patricia felt no joy in it, only a profound, heavy closure. She missed Nate terribly. Her heart physically ached when she remembered his small, missing tooth smile. And though she fought against it every night in her small bed, she missed Mac. She missed the quiet giant who had offered her his bed, who had threatened a lawyer with a wrench to protect her, who had shown her that actions spoke louder than billions. One rainy Tuesday, Patricia was in the back of the greenhouse, misting a row of heavy hydrangeas. The bell at the front of the shop jingled. She didn't look up, assuming it was a customer. I'll be right with you, she called out, wiping dirt on her apron. She turned the corner of the aisle and froze. Max stood there. He wasn't wearing a bespoke tuxedo, nor was he wearing his mechanic's flannel. He wore a simple, clean black sweater and dark jeans. He looked exhausted, the dark circles under his eyes deeper than ever. Holding his hand was Nate. Patty! Nate yelled, breaking away from his father and sprinting down the aisle. He slammed into Patricia's legs, burying his face in her apron. Patricia dropped her spray bottle. Tears sprang to her eyes instantly. She dropped to her knees, wrapping her arms tightly around the boy, burying her face in his hair. Oh, Nate, I missed you so much, sweet boy. Dad said you were mad at us, Nate mumbled into her shoulder, but I told him you just needed time out. Patricia let out a watery, broken laugh. She looked up. Mac was walking toward her slowly. He stopped a few feet away. He looked nervous, a billionaire who moved markets with a phone call, standing terrified among the ferns. How did you find me? Patricia asked softly, standing up. I own the bank that processes the greenhouse's payroll, Mac said. I've known where you were since day one. I wanted to give you the time Nate said you needed. Patricia crossed her arms, trying to guard her heart. Did you come to buy a plant, Mr. Benson? Mac took a deep breath. He looked down at the dirt floor, then back up into her eyes. Slowly, the towering, imposing man dropped to one knee, not to propose, to beg. I was wrong, Patricia, Mac said, his voice raw, stripped of all arrogance. I let my fear of being used turn me into a manipulator. I told myself I was protecting Nate, but I was just a coward hiding behind a dirty shirt. I tested you, and you passed, but I failed. I failed to trust you. Patricia stared at him, the tears freely falling down her cheeks now. I don't want the money if I have to sit in that penthouse alone, Mac continued, his gray eyes pleading. I kept the auto shop. It's still in my name. I'll go back to fixing cars every day for the rest of my life if it means I get to come upstairs and eat burnt spaghetti with you. You are the only real thing I have ever had. Please, forgive me. Patricia looked at the man on his knees in the dirt. She looked at Nate, who was watching her with hopeful, wide eyes. She realized then that the power imbalance was gone. Olin had forced her into a marriage to pay a debt. Mac had created a lie to find a truth. But right now, in this greenhouse, there were no debts, no lies, and no billion. Just a broken man, a sweet boy, and her. Patricia took a step forward. She reached down, placing her hands on Mac's broad shoulders, and gently urged him to stand. I don't want to live in the auto shop, Mac, she whispered, her voice trembling but resolute. Mac's face fell, a look of utter devastation washing over him. Patricia smiled through her tears, her hands sliding up to cup his face. The plumbing is terrible, and the couch is ruining your back. But if you promise me no more tests, no more secrets, and no more shadows, I'll let you take me to dinner. As my husband. Mac let out a breath that sounded like a sob. He wrapped his massive arms around her, pulling her flush against his chest, burying his face in her neck. He held her as if she were the most precious, fragile thing in his universe, because to him, she was. Nate cheered, hugging both of their legs. Patricia closed her eyes, resting her head against Mac's solid chest. She had lost an inheritance, but she had gained an empire. An empire built not on gold or corporate takeovers, but on trust, forgiveness, and a love forged in the rust and the rain. From the depths of betrayal in a grimy auto shop to the stunning revelation in a high society ballroom, Patricia and Mac's story is a roller coaster of emotion, power, and ultimately, redemption. This story teaches us a profound real-life lesson. True wealth isn't measured by the balance in a bank account or the label on a suit. True wealth is found in the character of the people who stand by you when you have absolutely nothing. Mac had to hide his billions to find genuine love, and Patricia had to lose her aristocratic status to discover her true strength and worth. Never judge a book by its cover, because the quietest people often hold the most power and the deepest capacity for love. If you love this story of hidden identities, sweet revenge, and emotional triumph, please hit that like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more dramatic, heart-wrenching stories every week. Drop a comment below. What would you do if you found out your partner was secretly a billionaire? See you in the next video.